Alright gang, it's your old pal Mr. Thunderwing here. So I stuck a load of more modern 3D arcade polygon racers onto the mini Outrun cabinet that were far more advanced than the old main racers that I've been playing. Being the genius that I am though, I'd actually made life quite difficult for myself getting these games on there in the first place with how I'd actually left the mini cabinet when I thought I'd finished it. So let's go into a bit of detail about what's actually going on here. Catch you again after the intro. Okay, so the short version of this is that I've stuck some extra games and emulators on the mini Outrun cabinet. The long version is that this wasn't the straightforward process it sounds like it should be. And I'm going to go into a bit of detail about that, mainly because it's kind of cathartic for me to talk about, and also because it might be helpful for anyone else out there that's thinking about doing any kind of similar arcade project like this, where the technology running everything is an old Android phone. If you just want to jump straight into seeing some new games running on the mini cabinet, I'll stick a little time jump info on the screen now and also add that into the video description. Still here? Great. So I've already released a couple of videos featuring the miniature Outrun arcade cabinet that, together with the help of one of my mates, I created using a thumbs up Retro Racer toy mini cabinet. Now, in the beginning, my plan had only ever been to put a very small collection of my favourite arcade racing games from the 80s and 90s on it using MAME, with Outrun being the obvious priority to get running first. I didn't want to end up with a 4001 MAME cabinet type situation, where you've got a bazillion titles on there just for the sake of it that you never actually play. But I realised in my haste to finish physically putting the mini cabinet together and getting everything hooked up and finalised in it, I hadn't really given much thought to other systems. I'd put Outrun Coast to Coast on it, which worked absolutely fine using PPSSPP emulator, after I tweaked a few settings that is. I'd also tried getting Daytona USA 2001 on the Dreamcast running too, using the Flycast core of the multi-system emulator RetroArch. Flycast was able to run Daytona, but there were noticeable frame rate drops and the audio was a bit stuttery, so I hadn't thought to try out any other Dreamcast games, as I just assumed they'd be the same. But the thought came to me, what if I'd been too quick to jump to conclusions there? And other Dreamcast games that were less demanding ran okay. And this was when I'd realised I'd made a bit of a glaring omission in my list of all-time favourite racers I could have tried out on the mini cabinet before I'd finished putting it together. I hadn't even tried to see if I could get Hydro Thunder working, probably my favourite Dreamcast racer of all time. The issue here was though, now the cabinet was completed, this was not going to be a simple undertaking. The old Samsung phone powering everything was sealed in the cabinet, and the idea was that it wasn't supposed to be coming back out again. You see, the nature of how the cabinet's front and back clipped together meant that once the side art was in place, it wasn't supposed to come apart again, because the side art was covering the seam where the front and the back met. This meant opening it back up again would have required peeling the art back off. The power on button on the side of the cabinet is also physically connected to the phone power button using a little bit of hot glue. So again, this was intended to not ever be removed. But the not knowing about whether I could have got a full speed, fully working version of Hydro Thunder on there started to become a bit of an obsessive thought going around in my brain. To quote Leon from Blade Runner,
"Nothing is worse than having an itch you can never scratch."
the phone still had a few gigabytes of storage space spare, so there definitely was room for at least a couple of extra games on there. Whilst I've got a bit of basic app navigation ability using the mini arcade's control panel, I can't use the phone's touchscreen at all in the cabinet because obviously the top half's behind the monitor bezel and the bottom half is covered by the arcade cabinet itself. So I couldn't just use the phone's web browser to download some more emulators and ROMs and then use the zip extractor and file manager to get them in the right place. I also found out, again retrospectively, you need to be signed into Google Chrome to install emulator cores using RetroArch, and as the phone was unlocked and requiring no passcode, I'd made sure to sign out of Chrome before I closed the cabinet up. I initially thought I'd be able to just plug my PC into the OTG mini hub the control panel PCB connects up to, and then transfer some Dreamcast ISOs directly into the phone folder. But trying that bore no fruit, unfortunately. The phone wasn't recognised when I plugged in a male-to-male USB-A cable into the PC and the OTG hub. So, very reluctantly, I decided to try unplugging the actual OTG cable itself from the phone in the case and plugging the phone's proprietary data and charging cable directly into the phone through the little hole I'd cut in the bottom of the arcade cabinet. And yeah, that didn't go well. The whole point of having the OTG mini hub connected up was to avoid having to ever do just that, so that I could charge the phone and operate the control panel all from the OTG hub without having to physically disturb the phone inside the arcade cabinet. As I tried plugging the data cable in through the little hole in the bottom of it, one of the bits of internal scaffolding I'd glued in place inside it to stop the phone moving around broke loose. This in turn meant the phone moved, which pulled the external on-off button I'd created on the side of the cabinet from the phone's internal power button, which was just held in place with a bit of hot glue. Ugh. Once I actually plugged the phone into my PC, it was recognised, but it wouldn't let me access the internal storage without pressing something on the screen. The screen I can't get to. Ah! So fantastic job all round here. I'd managed to break the phone loose inside the cabinet, break the power button, and the cable that I'd plugged in was doing absolutely fuck all. So this meant I was going to have to do the thing I've been trying to avoid and peel off the side art and open it back up. Fortunately, preempting just such a situation, I had ordered multiple spare copies of the cabinet artwork I'd created in Photoshop for just such an eventuality. Having finally done all this, it turned out, for some weird reason, I couldn't transfer the Hydro Thunder ISO file directly to my Dreamcast folder on the phone after all. The transfer kept hanging after about the first 150 megabytes. No idea why this was happening, but now the phone was out of the case, it wasn't really an issue, as I was able to just now download a copy of the game directly from the internet using the phone's browser. Having now done all this, it would have been extremely gutting if the game didn't play properly, but hey, at least that not knowing itch would now be scratched, right? So did it work? Yes, you bet your motherfucking ass it did. Hydro Thunder worked full speed absolutely perfectly. This made all the faff involved in this process worth it. And in fact, having to take the cabinet apart again turned out to not be the most terrible thing in the world either, as it allowed me to make a small change I wanted to do, which was to paint the area inside the cabinet between the monitor bezel and the screen black. It also gave me a chance to fix another problem which had subsequently occurred since I'd finished putting the cabinet together. And that problem was that the back panel had started to go a little bit strange. Now, I mentioned in the video where I talked about putting the cabinet together originally, about needing to fix the big hole I'd cut in the rear panel to remove the original Retro Racer's battery compartment, using some plastic melted with acetone. Now, this process wasn't exactly what you would call an exact science, and in the time since I'd put the back panel back on, Soon the plastic had taken on a bit of a weird warped appearance, presumably as all the acetone had not actually finished evaporating out of it. Removing the back panel allowed me to sand it back down again and then use a little bit of wood filler putty to smooth out the bumps and dimples, which I could then resand and respray to get it looking nice and smooth again. I also took this opportunity whilst I was doing a bit of work on the arcade cabinet to add 2 extra buttons to the right of the plinth that the arcade cabinet sits on, just to give me a little bit of extra joypad functionality. Getting the phone out of the case also meant I could more easily sort a few emulation and front end wrinkles out. I'm using a front end called Dig to select between and launch games, and I had it working with MAME with no issues. As already mentioned, I had RetroArch installed for the Dreamcast version of Daytona USA 2001, and using Dig I was able to download a Game Boy Advance emulation core for some of the F-Zero games. But before putting the cabinet together, I kinda half-arsed the Game Boy Advance RetroArch side of things. The screen was in slightly the wrong place for the bezel I'd created, compared to MAME and PPSSPP that is, and I hadn't figured out how to exit a game once it was launched, so I had to power off the cabinet to shut a game down. I kinda figured these F-Zero games were something I'd stuck on there, but would just never use, because I just thought not being able to get the display in the right place and exit the games easily was a limitation of the system. But when I dug a little deeper under the surface, RetroArch actually turned out to be an incredibly versatile emulation option, which really lets you tailor individual games to your liking. Again, I didn't want to go absolutely crazy adding 1,000,001 games to the Micro Racer cabinet, but along with Hydro Thunder, I added a small amount of Dreamcast, Mega Drive, Game Boy Advance and one additional PSP and PS1 title on there. I was able to set up each game with an individual button configuration I liked, and was also able to position the screen to vertically align it properly with the monitor bezel I'd already created. Brilliant. The only title that really gave me a bit of a headache were the controls for San Francisco Rush 2049 on the Dreamcast. Having previously got the game set up with a control configuration I liked, the next time I tried using it, the game kept on throwing up an error about the joypad not being plugged in. I spent hours trying various fixes that I'd found online to no avail, and this in itself was really weird because other people that I'd seen online that were having issues with Flycast not recognising their controllers were having it across the board for all their games, whereas I was just having this issue with this one specific game. All the other ones I'd tried connecting up were absolutely fine. I was on the verge of just giving up completely with this game. It was really starting to piss me off. And then in a last ditch effort to try and fix it, I tried changing the game's region from Europe to USA, and that seemed to magically sort it out. I've got no idea why. I don't know if changing the region saved something in the RetroArch Flycast config file or something, but the result was that it was working, so I was very happy with that. Another really super cool bonus of actually making a point of trying to get my head around RetroArch a bit better is that I was able to get Cannonball, the enhanced Outrun engine, working on a miniature Outrun cabinet. As I mentioned right at the start of this video, the whole idea with this was to get Outrun running in MAME, but for some weird reason, MAME struggled a bit to run Outrun unless the frame skipping option was on, which resulted in just a very slight loss in graphical fluidity in terms of how the frame rate was moving. It wasn't super noticeable, but it was definitely there. And the reason I'm saying that's a bit weird is because there were lots of other arcade racing titles on MAME which were running absolutely fine, which came out on later hardware, so I don't get why the older game was struggling a bit, but there we go. Cannonball though was able to run Outrun absolutely flawlessly with no problems, and it actually enhances the original game by allowing you to play it at 60 frames per second rather than 30 frames per second, which is an incredibly nice bonus. Visual improvements aren't the only thing that Cannonball offered though. It also let me make some improvements to the way the game controlled using the tiny little controls that I've got on the arcade cabinet. I was able to set the gears to automatic, and also able to set the controls to digital rather than analog to match the Micro Arcade's digital steering wheel. This really does make such a big difference in terms of how the game plays, allowing me far more precise steering. So yeah, there we go. That was probably a far more long-winded way of me saying that I got some additional games and emulators working on the Micro Cabinet, but I accidentally kind of fucked it up in the process and had to unfuck it up again afterwards. But I really just wanted to share my pain with you in undertaking this process. Anyway, that's probably enough talk from me. Let's have a look at some of these games in action. Ooh, this looks a bit tight. Ooh-hee. Ah, you prick.
Checkpoint.
Lost Island. Choose your boat. Tidal Blade. Three, two, one, go, go, go! Superstar.
Hey, so I'm going to have to mute the audio on this one because much as I love The Offspring and Bad Religion, and I genuinely do love Bad Religion, here's some video I shot on my phone from one of their gigs I went to a couple of years ago. The Crazy Taxi soundtrack has an unfortunate habit of causing matched third-party content issues, and to be honest I don't really want to have to deal with any of that sort of stuff. But hey, here's some royalty-free punk music I found on the internet, which I think has got a similar sort of energy.
your mode. Choose your difficulty. Novice, select your cup. Bronze cup, choose your vehicle. To go. You've got a new booster.
So as well as those slightly more graphically advanced races on things like the PlayStation, the PSP and the Dreamcast, I also decided to add on a few older races as well from one of my favourite consoles, the Mega Drive, and also the Sega Master System. Let's just have a quick look at some of those in action now. Just seeing if I can hit every single car there. Like my plan is working.
Nancy, we have the suspect. Ah.
So to finish up then, let's just have a quick look at a couple of random racers running in Maine.
sun is just there. You're under arrest on suspicion of first-degree murder.
You're charged with vandalism and robbery. Come away quietly.
This is Nancy. I found the hideout of the terrorists who's...
Roger.
Wait! Listen to the end. Have you got it?
Shut your pie hole, Nancy.
So the very, very last thing we'll just have a quick look at here is Daytona USA 2001, running on the Flycast Retro Arch core on the Mini Cabinet. And this Flycast core is the same one that we saw running Hydro Thunder and San Francisco Rush 2049 earlier without any problems at all. Now, I mentioned that unfortunately this doesn't quite run full speed, which is a shame because actually the frame rate doesn't look too bad, but just that slight loss of speed is enough to really distort the audio, which is something you can't really put up with, I don't think. Interestingly though, I did try another Dreamcast emulator called Recast, which was able to run the game without the audio distortion, but unfortunately there was no way to map the analog input which you need to actually control the game to the little digital steering wheel that I'm using to play it with. I'll show a quick bit of the attract mode of the game running in Recast after this bit of gameplay footage using Flycast. Alrighty tighty then, this is the end of the video, so I hope you've enjoyed my extended look at the mini Outrun cabinet and the little bit of hardship I had to go through to get these extra games on it. I think it was worth it. If you've got any questions for me about any part of this process at all, whether it's to do with the Android emulation, the actual construction of the cabinet itself, anything at all, please feel free to hit me up in the comments. Well, okay then gang, this is Mr. Thunderwing signing out. I've enjoyed our little chat, and hopefully I will catch you again sometime soon. Take care, bye bye.